The doors to the Galactic Defense Academy slid open with a quiet hiss. Lisa Martinez stepped inside, her small frame barely reaching past the shoulders of most students walking through the busy halls. She carried a worn leather bag over one shoulder and held a simple paper notebook in her hands. The academy buzzed with noise and activity. Students from 12 different worlds filled every corner of the massive space station. Tall blue-skinned Aquarians glided past on webbed feet. Rock-like. Bruthans stomped through the corridors, their heavy steps echoing off the metal walls. Elegant Silthari floated inches above the ground, their crystalline bodies catching the artificial sunlight from the overhead panels. Lisa walked slowly through the crowd, looking for room 247C. She had studied the station maps for weeks before. Arriving, but seeing it in person felt overwhelming. Everything was built for beings much larger than humans. She had to stretch to reach door controls and crane her neck to read signs posted high on the walls. A group of Garati warriors blocked the hallway ahead, their massive forms covered in natural armor plates. Lisa waited patiently for them to move, checking her schedule tablet one more time. Advanced Tactical Studies with Professor Veltar. She was already 5 minutes late. When she finally found the classroom, most seats were taken. The remaining empty chairs sat in the front row, directly under the professor's 4 watchful eyes. Lisa chose a seat in the back corner instead, squeezing past a sleeping Fenari student to reach the empty desk. Professor Veltar stood at the front of the room, his crystalline Zelonian skin shifting colors as he spoke. His forearms moved in complex patterns, drawing tactical diagrams in the air with holographic tools. Orbital defense requires understanding enemy approach vectors, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room's audio system. Who can tell me the primary weakness of a standard blockade formation? Several hands shot up. The professor called on a confident-looking Bruthan whose desk creaked under his weight. Flanking maneuvers through asteroid fields, the student rumbled in a deep voice. Correct, Jikmer. And how would you counter such an attack? Lisa opened her notebook and began writing with a simple pen. Around her, other students used advanced holographic tablets that projected 3-dimensional models and complex calculations. Her handwritten notes looked primitive by comparison, but she focused on the professor's words rather than the technology. Jikmer noticed her immediately. The massive Bruthan turned in his chair to stare at the small human in the corner. His red eyes glowed brighter as he studied her worn clothing and basic supplies. He nudged his Garati friend sitting next to him. Look at that, Jikmer whispered, loud enough for nearby students to hear. They must be desperate for students if they're letting humans enroll now. The Garati, a warrior named Thane, glanced back at Lisa. She looks like she could break if someone sneezed too hard. Lisa continued taking notes, giving no sign that she heard their comments. She wrote down the professor's explanation of defensive formations, occasionally looking up to follow the holographic demonstrations. Professor Veltar continued his lecture, unaware of the whispered conversation in the back. The key to successful defense lies not in raw firepower, but in understanding your enemy's capabilities and limitations. A smaller, more agile force can often defeat a larger opponent through superior tactics and positioning. Jikmer snorted quietly. His species, the Bruthans, had built their reputation on overwhelming strength and direct confrontation. The idea that smaller forces could win battles went against everything he had been taught since childhood. When the professor called for a 10-minute break, students stretched and began talking among themselves. Lisa remained in her seat, reviewing her notes and preparing for the second half of the class. Jikmer stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow across several desks. He walked over to Lisa's corner, his heavy footsteps announcing his approach. Several other students followed, curious to see what the intimidating Bruthan would do. You're human, right? Jikmer asked, looming over Lisa's desk. His voice carried across the room, causing other conversations to quiet down. Lisa looked up from her notebook. Yes, I am. I've heard humans are pretty fragile compared to most species. Is that true? Lisa closed her notebook and placed her hands flat on the desk. We're different from other species, yes. Zeekmer grinned, showing teeth designed for tearing through tough materials. Different is one way to put it. I'm surprised they let your kind into a military academy. This isn't exactly a safe profession. I appreciate your concern, Lisa said quietly. Her calm response seemed to frustrate Zeekmer. He had expected fear or anger, something he could use to prove his point about human weakness. Instead, the small woman sat peacefully, meeting his gaze without backing down. Maybe you should consider transferring to one of the civilian schools, Zeekmer continued. Something more suited to your ... limitations. A few students laughed nervously. Others, like Kelly Chun, an Aquarian with kind eyes, looked uncomfortable with the obvious bullying. She started to stand up, but Lisa caught her eye and shook her head slightly. I'll take that under consideration, Lisa said. Professor Veltar called the class back to order. Zeekmer returned to his seat, disappointed that his attempt to embarrass the human had failed to produce the reaction he wanted. Lisa reopened her notebook and prepared to continue taking notes. The professor began discussing advanced fleet maneuvers, using examples from recent conflicts throughout the galaxy. Lisa wrote steadily, occasionally asking questions that showed a deep understanding of military strategy. Her questions were so insightful that Professor Veltar paused several times to consider his answers carefully. Zeekmer noticed this too. The human's questions were better than those asked by students who had been studying warfare their entire lives. It bothered him in a way he couldn't quite explain. As class ended, students gathered their belongings and headed for the door. Lisa packed her simple supplies into her worn bag, taking her time while the crowd thinned out. Interesting questions today, Miss Martinez, Professor Veltar said as she passed his desk. Thank you, Professor. The material is fascinating. Veltar's crystalline skin shifted to a thoughtful purple color. Have you studied military history before coming here? Lisa paused at the doorway. I've had some experience with tactical planning. She left the classroom, leaving the professor wondering exactly what kind of experience a quiet human student might have with military tactics. Something about her questions had shown knowledge that went far beyond academic study. In the hallway, Zeekmer watched Lisa walk away. Her calm behavior and intelligent responses had not matched his expectations at all. Instead of the weak, frightened creature he had expected to find, she seemed almost prepared for his confrontation. This bothered Zeekmer more than he wanted to admit. He had never met an opponent he couldn't intimidate, and the small human's peaceful confidence felt like a challenge to everything he believed about strength and power. Tomorrow, he decided he would try harder to expose what he saw as human weakness. After all, everyone had a breaking point. The next morning, Lisa walked through the academy corridors carrying her books and notebooks. She had 30 minutes before her first class and planned to review yesterday's tactical formations in the library. The halls were busy with students heading to breakfast and early study sessions. Zeekmer waited around the corner from the dormitory exit. He had positioned himself perfectly to intercept the human student without making it look planned. When Lisa appeared, walking alone as usual, he stepped directly into her path. The collision sent Lisa's books flying across the metal floor. Her notebook opened as it hit the ground, scattering loose papers everywhere. Zeekmer's massive bulk barely registered the impact, but Lisa stumbled backward and nearly fell. Oh, sorry about that, Zeekmer said loudly, making sure other students could hear him. I didn't see you there. You humans are so small. Lisa knelt down and began gathering her scattered papers. Other students walked past, some stopping to watch the scene unfold. A few offered to help, but Lisa politely declined their assistance. No harm done, Lisa said, stacking her books carefully. These things happen in crowded hallways. Zeekmer expected anger or embarrassment. Instead, the human woman treated the obvious attack as an accident. Her calm response made him look like the aggressor, which only increased his frustration. Maybe you should watch where you're going, Zeekmer continued. The academy can be dangerous for someone your size. Lisa stood up, brushing dust off her notebook. I'll be more careful. Thank you for the advice. She walked away without another word, leaving Zeekmer standing in the hallway with several students staring at him. His attempt to humiliate the human had backfired completely. Over the following weeks, Zeekmer's harassment became a daily routine. He would bump into Lisa at mealtimes, causing her to spill food or drop her tray. He questioned her answers in every shared class, suggesting that human thinking was too simple for complex military problems. When she walked past groups of his friends, they would make loud comments about human weakness and fragility. Lisa never reacted with anger or fear. She cleaned up spilled food without complaint. She answered Zeekmer's challenges in class with detailed explanations that often impressed the professors. When students made cruel jokes, she simply continued with whatever she was doing. Her peaceful responses began to frustrate not just Zeekmer, but some of his followers as well. They had expected easy entertainment from bullying the small human. Instead, they found themselves looking cruel and petty while Lisa maintained her dignity. Other students started to notice this pattern. Kelly Chun, the kind Aquarian, began sitting near Lisa in classes. Jake Morrison, another human student, offered to walk with her between buildings. Lisa thanked them for their concern, but insisted she could handle the situation herself. You don't have to put up with this, Jake told her after watching Zeekmer deliberately knock her books off a table. I can report him to the administration. That won't be necessary, Lisa replied, reorganizing her notes. Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow. Her response puzzled Jake. Most students would have been angry or upset by now. Lisa seemed almost patient with her tormentors, as if she understood something about them that others missed. In advanced tactical studies, Lisa continued to excel despite the constant harassment. Her questions showed deep understanding of military strategy and battlefield psychology. When Professor Veltar discussed historical conflicts, Lisa would occasionally add insights that surprised even the instructor. Miss Martinez raises an excellent point about supply line vulnerabilities, Professor Veltar said during one class. Her analysis of the Kepler campaign shows sophisticated understanding of logistics under combat conditions. Zeekmer grew more irritated with each praise Lisa received. In his mind, humans were weak newcomers to the galactic community. They had no business excelling in military studies alongside species that had been warriors for thousands of years. The situation reached a turning point during a practical exercise in the Academy's training facility. Students were randomly paired for hand-to-hand combat simulations using safety equipment and energy dampeners that prevented serious injury. When the instructor called out the pairings, Lisa found herself matched against Kor, a mid-sized Fenari warrior known for his speed and aggressive fighting style. The Fenari were respected throughout the galaxy for their combat abilities, and Kor had never lost a practice match. This should be interesting, Zeekmer announced to his friends. I bet the human doesn't last 30 seconds. Other students gathered around the practice circle, most expecting to see a quick demonstration of Fenari superiority. Lisa entered the ring carrying standard training weapons and wearing basic protective gear. She looked tiny compared to Kor's muscular frame and natural armor plating. Kor had heard weeks of comments about human weakness. He approached the match casually, planning to end it quickly with a simple takedown that would be impressive but not harmful. He had no intention of seriously hurting such a small opponent. Ready when you are, Kor said, settling into a standard Fenari combat stance. Lisa nodded and took her own position. Her stance looked different from anything the watching students recognized. She held her training weapons loosely, her body relaxed but alert. The instructor signaled the start of the match. Kor moved forward confidently, using a straightforward attack that had worked against dozens of previous opponents. He expected Lisa to retreat or attempt a defensive block that he could easily overwhelm. Instead, Lisa stepped toward his attack. She moved with fluid precision that seemed almost choreographed, redirecting Kor's momentum and using his own force against him. Her training weapons found gaps in his defense that he didn't know existed. Within 15 seconds, Kor found himself on the ground with Lisa's practice blade pressed against his throat. The training dampeners had prevented any real damage, but the position made clear that in actual combat, the match would have been fatal. The gymnasium fell completely silent. Students stared in shock at the scene before them. The supposedly weak human had not just defeated a respected Fenari warrior, but had done so with techniques that made the fight look effortless. Professor Veltar, who supervised all practice matches, called the contest complete. His 4 eyes showed surprise and growing interest as he studied Lisa's performance. "Excellent technique, Miss Martinez," he said. "Where did you learn those maneuvers?" Lisa helped Kor to his feet, checking to make sure he wasn't injured. "I've had some training in close combat situations." Kor shook his head, still trying to understand what had happened. "I've never seen moves like that before. What fighting style do you use?" "A combination of different methods," Lisa replied. "Whatever works best for the situation." Students began talking excitedly among themselves. The quiet human in the corner had just demonstrated combat skills that none of them possessed. Even advanced students who had trained their entire lives couldn't move with the precision they had just witnessed. Ziekmer stood frozen, his confidence shaken for the first time since the harassment began. He had built his entire campaign around the assumption that humans were physically inferior. Lisa's victory over Kor suggested that assumption might be completely wrong. "Lucky shot," Ziekmer muttered to his friends. "Kor must have slipped or something." But his words sounded hollow even to himself. Other students had watched the entire match carefully. There had been no luck involved, no accidents or mistakes. Lisa had controlled every moment of the fight, with skill that spoke of serious training and real experience. As students filed out of the gymnasium, many approached Lisa with new respect and curiosity. They asked questions about her techniques and background, but she answered vaguely, saying only that she had studied various forms of combat during her education. Ziekmer left the training facility, feeling confused and angry. His plan to expose human weakness had instead revealed abilities he didn't understand. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he wondered if he had seriously underestimated his target. That evening, Lisa sat in her dormitory room, cleaning and maintaining her practice equipment. She had handled the day's events calmly, but something had changed. The harassment would likely escalate now that Ziekmer's confidence had been challenged. She hoped it wouldn't come to that, but her experience told her that bullies rarely backed down when their authority was questioned. Tomorrow would probably bring new challenges, and she would meet them the same way she had met every other obstacle in her life, with patience, preparation, and the quiet strength that came from knowing exactly who she was. Word of Lisa's victory over Kor spread through the academy faster than news of a fleet movement. By the next morning, students who had never noticed the quiet human were stopping her in hallways to ask about her fighting techniques. The respect in their voices was clear, and many offered genuine friendship for the first time since her arrival. Ziekmer watched this change with growing anger. The human who should have been broken by weeks of harassment was instead gaining popularity and admiration. His carefully planned campaign to expose human weakness had backfired completely, making him look foolish in front of his peers. During lunch in the main cafeteria, Zeekmer gathered his closest supporters around a table near the center of the room. The location was strategic, allowing his voice to carry to nearby tables where other students could overhear his words. "One lucky fight doesn't prove anything," Zeekmer announced loudly. "Kor probably went easy on her because she's so small. Any real warrior would have ended that match in seconds." Lisa sat at a corner table with Kelly Chun and Jake Morrison, quietly eating her meal and reviewing notes for afternoon classes. She could hear Zeekmer's comments but chose not to respond, focusing instead on a tactical analysis assignment. "I think you're wrong," said Amy Foster, a human engineering student who had recently started joining their study group. "Did you see how she moved? That wasn't luck." Zeekmer's red eyes glowed brighter as he turned us toward Amy's table. "Humans stick together, I see. That's exactly what I'd expect from a weak species." The cafeteria grew quieter as students sensed a confrontation building. Many had witnessed Zeekmer's harassment campaign and were curious to see how it would end. Others simply enjoyed the drama that broke up their routine academic schedule. Jake Morrison stood up from Lisa's table, his face flushed with anger. "Back off, Zeekmer. You've been picking on Lisa for weeks, and everyone's getting tired of it." "Sit down, Jake," Lisa said quietly. "This isn't your fight." "It is my fight when he insults all humans," Jake replied. "Someone needs to stand up to this bully." Zeekmer rose from his seat, his massive frame towering over the human student. Several Garati and Bruthan students flanked him, creating an intimidating wall of muscle and armor. The size difference between the two groups was striking and obvious. "You want to defend human honor?" Zeekmer asked with a cruel smile. "Fine, I challenge your champion to a formal exhibition match. Let's see how tough humans really are when they face a real opponent." Exhibition matches were weekly events at the academy, allowing students to test their skills before faculty and peers. Unlike practice sessions, these contests used full contact rules with only basic safety equipment. Injuries were common, and reputations were made or destroyed in the arena. "I accept," Lisa said. Standing up from her table, the cafeteria erupted in surprised murmurs. Students had expected Jake to respond to the challenge, not the small woman who had been eating quietly in the corner. Even Zeekmer looked momentarily confused by her quick acceptance. "You don't have to do this," Kelly Chun whispered urgently. "He's 3 times your size." Lisa finished packing her books into her worn bag. "Yes, I do. This has gone on long enough." "The exhibition is tomorrow night," Zeekmer called out, making sure everyone could hear. "I'll try not to hurt you too badly. But accidents happen in real combat." Lisa nodded calmly and walked toward the cafeteria exit. Students stepped aside to let her pass, many wearing expressions of concern and sympathy. They expected to witness a massacre tomorrow evening, with the quiet human student as the victim. News of the challenge spread throughout the station within hours. Faculty members discussed whether to cancel the match due to the obvious size and strength disparity. Students placed informal bets, with overwhelming odds favoring the Bruthan warrior. Even Lisa's friends worried that she had made a terrible mistake. That evening, Jake Morrison found Lisa in the academy library, surrounded by military history texts and tactical manuals. She had claimed a corner table and was taking notes in her simple notebook, seemingly unconcerned about tomorrow's match. "Are you crazy?" Jake asked, sitting down across from her. "Zeekmer could kill you by accident. His species can bench press hover cars." Lisa looked up from a book about asymmetric warfare tactics. "Physical strength isn't everything in combat. There are other factors to consider." "What factors?" "He's got 4 times your muscle mass and natural armor plating. You're going to get crushed." "Maybe," Lisa replied, returning to her reading. "But probably not." Her calm confidence puzzled Jake even more than her acceptance of the challenge. Most students would be nervous or afraid before facing such a dangerous opponent. Lisa seemed to be studying for a regular exam rather than preparing for potential serious injury. "What are you reading that's so important?" Jake asked, trying to see the book titles. "Historical accounts of smaller forces defeating larger opponents," Lisa replied. "David and Goliath scenarios, if you will. This isn't ancient history. This is tomorrow night, and you're going to get hurt." Lisa closed her book and looked directly at Jake. "Have you ever been in a real fight? Not a practice match or training exercise, but actual combat where your life was on the line?" Jake shook his head. Most academy students came from peaceful worlds where conflict was rare. Their combat training was theoretical rather than practical. "I have," Lisa said simply. "Several times. Size and strength matter, but they're not the only factors that determine who wins." "You're talking like you've been in actual wars." Lisa gathered her books and stood up. "I need to get some rest before tomorrow." "Thank you for your concern, Jake. It means a lot to have friends who care." She left the library, leaving Jake sitting alone with dozens of unanswered questions. Something about Lisa's confidence suggested she knew exactly what she was getting into, but that seemed impossible given her background as a new academy student. Meanwhile, Ziekmer spent the evening in the training facilities, working out with weights that would crush most species. His Bruthan physiology allowed him to lift incredible amounts while barely breaking a sweat. Other students watched in awe as he practiced combat combinations against holographic opponents. "This will be over in 30 seconds, Ziekmer told his supporters. "Maybe less if she actually tries to fight back." His friends agreed enthusiastically, feeding his confidence and ego. They had watched him dominate every opponent he had ever faced. The small human would be no different, except that her defeat would prove their point about species hierarchy within the galactic community. Professor Veltar heard about the challenge during his evening meal with other faculty members. Several instructors expressed concerns about allowing such an uneven match to proceed. The potential for serious injury seemed high, and student safety was always their primary concern. "Perhaps we should cancel the exhibition," suggested Dr. Kane, the Academy's medical officer. "The size difference alone makes this dangerous." Professor Veltar considered the suggestion carefully. He had been teaching for over 50 years and had seen thousands of students pass through the academy. Something about Lisa Martinez intrigued him in ways he couldn't explain. "Miss Martinez is an adult who accepted the challenge willingly," he finally decided. "We'll proceed with full medical staff standing by. If the match becomes too dangerous, I'll stop it immediately." The decision satisfied most faculty concerns, though many still worried about the outcome. Students throughout the academy spent the evening discussing the upcoming match, with most predicting a quick and decisive victory for Ziekmer. Lisa Martinez spent her final evening before the challenge in her dormitory room, performing maintenance on her equipment and reviewing mental exercises she had learned years earlier. She had faced much more dangerous opponents than an overconfident academy student, though none of her classmates knew that yet. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. She hoped it wouldn't come to revealing more about herself than necessary, but sometimes circumstances forced difficult choices. As she prepared for sleep, Lisa thought about the young man who had challenged her. Ziekmer reminded her of soldiers she had known during her previous career, warriors who confused aggression with strength and dominance with leadership. Perhaps tomorrow's lesson would help him grow into something better. She certainly hoped so, for both their sakes. The academy's main gymnasium filled with spectators long before the scheduled exhibition time. Students from every species crowded into the viewing areas, excited whispers echoing off the metal walls. Word had spread beyond the academy to other sections of the space station, bringing civilian workers and off-duty military personnel to witness what many expected to be a spectacular mismatch. Professor Veltar stood at the center of the combat ring. Checking safety equipment and reviewing emergency procedures with the medical team, Dr. Kane positioned trauma units around the arena, preparing for injuries that seemed inevitable given the size difference between the competitors. Betting pools had formed throughout the station, with odds heavily favoring Zeekmer. Most people gave Lisa less than a minute before the match would end in her defeat. A few sympathetic souls bet on her out of loyalty rather than any real belief in her chances. Zeekmer entered the gymnasium to thunderous cheers from his supporters. His massive Bruthen frame looked even more imposing under the bright arena lights. He wore standard combat gear that barely contained his bulging muscles, and his red eyes glowed with confidence as he acknowledged the crowd's approval. He raised his arms above his head, flexing for the audience and playing up his role as the overwhelming favorite. Students cheered louder, caught up in the excitement of watching their champion dominate an inferior opponent. The noise was deafening as Zeekmer basked in the attention. Lisa entered quietly through a side door, carrying her equipment in the same worn bag she used for books. She moved to her corner without fanfare, wearing basic training gear that looked almost childlike next to Zeekmer's intimidating appearance. The crowd noise died down as spectators got their first clear look at the dramatic size difference. "This is going to be ugly," Jake Morrison whispered to Kelly Chun. They sat in the front row with other students who had become Lisa's friends, all wearing expressions of worry and dread. Amy Foster shook her head in disbelief. "I can't watch this. She's going to get seriously hurt." Lisa began her warm-up routine in the corner, stretching with movements that finally caught the attention of a few observant faculty members. Professor Veltar watched carefully as she performed exercises that seemed far more advanced than standard academy training. "Those are military preparation drills," Dr. Kane observed quietly. "Where would a civilian student learn techniques like that?" Before Professor Veltar could respond, the official timekeeper signaled that the exhibition should begin. The crowd fell silent as both fighters moved toward the center of the ring. "Competitors ready?" Professor Veltar asked, looking first at Zeekmer, then at Lisa. Zeekmer nodded eagerly, bouncing on his feet and shadowboxing to show off his speed and power. The crowd responded with more cheers, feeding his ego and confidence. Lisa simply nodded. Once, her expression calm and focused. She held her training weapons loosely at her sides, her stance relaxed but alert. Something in her posture made Professor Veltar pause, recognizing body language he had seen before in veteran warriors. "Begin," Professor Veltar announced. Stepping back to give the fighters room, Zeekmer charged forward immediately, using his favorite tactic of overwhelming opponents with raw aggression and superior size. He planned to end the match quickly, with a devastating combination that would showcase Bruthen superiority, while minimizing actual harm to his opponent. Lisa didn't retreat or dodge as everyone expected. Instead, she stepped directly into Zeekmer's attack, moving with fluid precision that seemed to slow time itself. What happened next would be talked about at the academy for years to come. Lisa redirected Zeekmer's charging momentum with a subtle movement that sent him stumbling past her. Before he could recover, she struck pressure points on his arms and legs with surgical accuracy, temporarily numbing his limbs and disrupting his balance. Zeekmer tried to grab her with his massive hands, but Lisa flowed around his attacks like water around rocks. She targeted joints and nerve clusters with strikes so precise they bypassed his natural armor completely. Every movement was calculated and controlled, showing combat experience that made academy training look like children's games. The crowd sat in stunned silence as the supposedly inferior human systematically dismantled the Bruthen warrior's offensive capabilities. Zeekmer's size and strength meant nothing when he couldn't land a single blow on his opponent. Lisa controlled the distance between them perfectly, staying just close enough to strike, but too far away for Zeekmer to grab her. She used techniques that none of the watching students had ever seen before. movements that spoke of real combat experience against dangerous opponents. Within 3 minutes, Zeekmer was breathing heavily and stumbling from the precise strikes to his pressure points. His confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by confusion and growing fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. Nothing in his training had prepared him for an opponent who fought like this. Lisa ended the match with a complex maneuver that left Zeekmer immobilized on the ground. Her training weapon rested against his throat in a position that would have been fatal in real combat. The hold was perfect, leaving no room for escape or counterattack. The gymnasium remained completely silent for several long seconds. Spectators struggled to process what they had just witnessed. The quiet human student had not just defeated the powerful Bruthan warrior, but had done so with such skill and control that the outcome never seemed in doubt. Professor Veltar called the match officially complete. Winner, Lisa Martinez. The silence broke as students began talking excitedly, trying to understand what they had seen. Lisa helped Zeekmer to his feet, checking to make sure her pressure point strikes hadn't caused permanent damage. How? Zeekmer gasped, still trying to catch his breath. Where did you learn to fight like that? Professor Veltar approached them both, his 4 eyes showing intense curiosity and growing suspicion. He had taught military tactics for decades and recognized combat techniques when he saw them. Miss Martinez, he said carefully, those movements were far beyond academy-level training. Where exactly did you study before coming here? Lisa looked around the gymnasium at the hundreds of faces staring at her with awe and confusion. Students who had dismissed her as weak now watched with respect and fear. Faculty members wore expressions of shock and dawning realization. She had hoped to complete her studies without revealing her past, but circumstances had forced her hand. There was no point in maintaining the pretense any longer. I'm Colonel Lisa Martinez, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent gymnasium. Retired. I came here to study peace, not to teach war. The impact of her words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Students frantically searched their memories for the name, while faculty members who recognized it immediately began connecting the pieces. Colonel Lisa Martinez, hero of the Proxima conflict, recipient of the Galactic Cross for Valor, the woman who had held New Terra against impossible odds and negotiated the peace treaty that ended the bloodiest war in recent history. Jake Morrison's mouth fell open as he stared at his quiet study partner. You're the Lisa Martinez? The one who saved New Terra? Amy Foster grabbed Kelly Chun's arm. She led the defense of the civilian evacuation at Kepler Station. My brother was there. She saved his life. The gymnasium erupted in chaos as students realized they had been sharing classes with one of the most famous military heroes in galactic history. The quiet woman in the corner who used a simple notebook was a legendary figure whose tactical brilliance had changed the course of wars. Zeekmer stared at Lisa with new understanding and growing horror. He had spent weeks harassing and bullying someone who had fought in more real battles than he could imagine. His face flushed with shame as he realized how foolish and cruel his behavior had been. Professor Veltar approached Lisa with deep respect. Colonel Martinez, I'm honored to have you in my classroom. Your tactical innovations at Proxima are studied throughout the galaxy. Lisa nodded politely but looked uncomfortable with the attention. I prefer to be called Lisa, Professor. I'm here as a student, not as a military officer. The revelation changed everything in an instant. Students who had ignored or mocked Lisa now regarded her with awe and reverence. The woman they had thought was weak and out of place was actually one of the most qualified people on the station to study military tactics. As the crowd slowly dispersed, still buzzing with excitement and disbelief, Lisa gathered her equipment and prepared to leave. The exhibition match was over, but she knew her quiet life at the academy had ended the moment she revealed her identity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as she tried to navigate relationships with classmates who now saw her as a legend rather than a person. But tonight, she had taught an important lesson about judging others by their appearance. Sometimes, the most dangerous warriors were the ones who chose to put down their weapons and pick up books instead. The news spread through the academy like wildfire. By morning, every student and faculty member knew that the quiet human in the corner was Colonel Lisa Martinez, one of the most decorated war heroes in galactic history. Students who had access to the Galactic Network spent hours reading about her military career, discovering achievements that seemed impossible for one person. She had led the desperate defense of New Terra, when enemy forces outnumbered her troops 10-1. She had coordinated the evacuation of 3 million civilians from war zones while under constant attack. Her tactical innovations had saved countless lives and ended conflicts that military experts thought would last for decades. The same classmates who had watched Zeekmer harass her for weeks now understood. They had witnessed the bullying of someone who had faced down entire enemy fleets. The woman who carried a worn notebook and simple pen had negotiated peace treaties that reshaped the political landscape of 12-star systems. Jake Morrison sat in his dormitory room, staring at news articles about Lisa's career on his tablet. "She saved the colony ships at Vega Prime," he told his roommate in amazement. 40,000 people would have died without her. Amy Foster discovered that Lisa had personally led rescue missions to extract trapped soldiers from behind enemy lines. She went into combat zones that other commanders said were suicide missions. And she brought everyone home alive. Kelly Chun found records of Lisa's work with refugee settlements, helping displaced families rebuild their lives after the wars ended. She didn't just fight battles. She helped people heal afterward. The revelation created a strange atmosphere throughout the academy. Students who had barely noticed Lisa before now watched her every movement with fascination. Some tried to approach her for autographs or war stories, but she politely declined all requests for attention. "I'm here to learn, not to relive the past," Lisa told curious students who cornered her in hallways. "The war is over. I want to study how to prevent future conflicts." Her response only increased the respect students felt for her. Here was someone who had achieved legendary status but wanted nothing more than to be treated as a regular academy student. Her humility in the face of fame impressed even cynical faculty members. Zekmer spent 2 sleepless nights wrestling with shame and guilt. He had built his entire academy reputation on being the strongest and most intimidating student. His harassment campaign against Lisa now looked like the behavior of a spoiled child picking on a decorated veteran. On the 3rd day after the exhibition match, he found Lisa in the library during her usual evening study session. She sat in her corner table, reading a book about conflict resolution and taking notes in her simple notebook. "Colonel Martinez," Zeekmer said quietly, approaching her table with obvious nervousness. Lisa looked up from her book. "Lisa is fine. What can I do for you, Zeekmer?" His use of her first name surprised him. Despite everything he had done to her, she still treated him with basic respect and courtesy. The contrast with his own behavior made his shame even worse. "I came to apologize," he said, struggling to find the right words. "My behavior toward you was wrong. I had no right to treat you the way I did." Lisa closed her book and gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please, sit down. Tell me why you felt the need to target me in the first place." Zekmer sat heavily, his massive frame making the chair creak. "My species has a reputation for being nothing but brutes and thugs. When I came to the academy, I thought I had to prove that Bruthans were the strongest, the most dominant. I saw you as an easy target to make that point. And what did you hope to accomplish by proving dominance over someone you thought was weak?" The question made Zeekmer think carefully about his motivations. "I guess I thought it would make other students respect me. But watching you fight, seeing what you've really accomplished, I realize how stupid that was." Lisa leaned forward slightly. Respect earned through fear and intimidation isn't real respect, Ziegmer. It's just temporary compliance that disappears the moment someone stronger comes along. Like what happened when you beat me in the exhibition. Exactly. Real respect comes from your actions, your character, and how you treat others. Especially, how you treat those who can't fight back. Ziegmer nodded slowly, beginning to understand lessons that his warrior culture had never taught him. How do I earn real respect? How do I become better than what I was? Lisa smiled, the first genuine warmth she had shown him since they met. You just took the first step by recognizing the problem and wanting to change. The rest will come with time and effort. Their conversation continued for over an hour. Lisa shared stories not about her famous battles, but about the soldiers she had commanded and the lessons she had learned about leadership. She talked about the difference between strength and power, between commanding through fear and inspiring through example. The strongest warriors I ever knew, Lisa said, were the ones who used their power to protect people weaker than themselves. They fought so others wouldn't have to. Professor Veltar noticed the change in classroom dynamics immediately. Students who had previously competed for attention now listened more carefully to each other's ideas. Ziegmer, once the most disruptive presence in class, began asking thoughtful questions about diplomatic solutions to military problems. Lisa's influence extended beyond her former tormentor. Her approach to problems inspired other students to think differently about conflict resolution. When she occasionally shared experiences from her military service, the lessons carried weight that no textbook could match. During the siege of Kepler Station, Lisa told the class during a discussion about resource management, we learned that sometimes the best victory is the one that doesn't require fighting at all. We negotiated a supply corridor that saved both military and civilian lives. Her stories always focused on cooperation, clever solutions, and the human cost of warfare rather than glorious battle victories. Students began to understand that real military leadership meant finding ways to end conflicts quickly with minimal casualties. The Academy's exhibition match became legendary, but not for the combat that was displayed. Instead, it became known as the day students learned about judging others by their actions rather than their appearance. The quiet human in the corner had taught them more about strength and leadership in one evening than years of traditional military training. Months later, Ziegmer had become one of Lisa's closest friends at the Academy. He used his natural leadership abilities to help younger students rather than intimidate them. His transformation inspired other aggressive students to reconsider their own behavior. You changed my life, he told Lisa as they studied together in the library. I was becoming exactly the kind of person that gives my species a bad reputation. You changed your own life, Lisa replied. I just showed you that there were other options. The final scene found Lisa exactly where she had started, sitting in her corner of the Advanced Tactical Studies classroom with her worn notebook and simple pen. But now her classmates understood that sometimes the most powerful tools were experience, wisdom, and the quiet strength that came from choosing peace after having the power to wage war. Students throughout the Academy had learned that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their physical abilities or their technology, but their capacity to grow beyond their conflicts and seek better solutions. Lisa Martinez embodied this perfectly, a warrior who had chosen to become a student of peace. Her presence at the Academy became a daily reminder that true courage sometimes meant laying down your weapons and picking up books instead. The lesson would stay with her classmates long after they graduated and took their places as leaders throughout the galaxy. In the end, the human who had seemed weakest had proven to be the strongest teacher they had ever encountered.